The alien principal said, "No weapons allowed." The human grinned. The station smelled like burnt copper, and something sweet that had no name in any human language. That was the first thing Ryu noticed when he stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the floor of Vora 9, the massive space station that floated quietly between two stars, neither of which had a proper name on any human map. He carried a single bag on his back, gray jacket, black boots, hands in his pockets. He looked like a boy who had just shown up late to school, which, in a way, he had. Vora 9 was home to the Galactic Interspecies Academy, the most respected school in 4-star systems. Students came from dozens of worlds. Some had scales, some had extra arms, some communicated through color changes in their skin, and until 3 weeks ago, not a single one of them had ever been human. Ryu was the first. He walked through the main entrance gate slowly, looking around with calm, dark eyes. The corridor was wide and tall, built for species far larger than humans. Lights ran along the ceiling in long blue strips. The floor was smooth and slightly warm under his boots. Around him, students of every shape and size moved between classes, talking in languages that buzzed and clicked and hummed. They all stopped when they saw him. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasp, no alarm. They simply stopped moving and looked at him the way someone looks at an animal they have read about but never actually seen, with curiosity, with a little bit of unease, with the quiet, careful attention of creatures who had learned long ago that new things in space could be dangerous. Ryu looked back at them. He did not wave. He just looked, steady and even, the way a person looks when they are used to being stared at and have simply stopped caring about it. A sound came from the far end of the corridor, heavy, rhythmic, like something large walking on a hard floor. Principal Dravok appeared. He was enormous, a Korvathi, one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. 8 limbs, 4 of which he used to walk, and 4 of which moved slowly at his sides, like thick, dark branches in a quiet wind. His body was covered in deep gray plating, layered like armor, though it was simply his natural skin. His face had no nose, no ears, and no mouth in any place a human would expect one. The mouth was in the center of his chest, a wide horizontal opening that moved when he spoke and produced sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He stopped in front of Ryu and looked down at him. Ryu looked up. For a moment, neither of them moved. His voice came out in the universal translation frequency that all students at the academy were fitted with, a small device behind the ear that converted language in real time. Ryu had been given his on the shuttle. "You are the human," Dravok said. It was not a question. "Ryu," he replied. "Yes." Dravok studied him for another long moment. His 4 upper limbs folded slowly across his chest plate. Then he spoke again, and his voice filled the entire corridor the way a sound fills a room when someone wants every single person in it to hear. "This academy has one rule above all others," Dravok said. "One rule that applies to every student, from every world, of every species, without exception. Do you understand?" "I understand that you have a rule," Ryu said. "I don't know what it is yet." Something shifted in Dravok's posture. Not anger, more like the careful stillness of a creature recalibrating. "No weapons," Dravok said. "Not of any kind. Not carried. Not hidden. Not assembled on premises. Not stored in personal quarters. Not brought inside the station under any classification. The scanners at every entrance are thorough. They detect everything. Biological, mechanical, chemical, energy-based. Everything." He paused. "Everything." Ryu listened to all of this. He nodded once when it was finished. Then, he smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that doesn't ask permission and doesn't offer explanation. It simply appeared on his face, the way a thought appears, quickly, quietly, and completely. Dravok watched the smile. His 4 lower limbs shifted slightly on the floor. "Is something unclear?" he asked. No, Ryu said. Everything is very clear. No weapons. Understood. The smile didn't leave. Dravok held his gaze for 3 more seconds, then he turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps fading down the corridor. The other students slowly began to move again, though many of them kept their eyes on Ryu for a long time after that. A girl appeared at his side. She was Korvathi, but young, smaller than Dravok by a significant amount, with lighter plating and eyes that were a pale, washed-out yellow. She had been assigned as his student partner for the first semester, which meant she was responsible for showing him where things were, and making sure he didn't accidentally violate any of the Academy's social customs, of which there were many. Her name was Ara. That was Principal Dravok, she said, as though he might not have noticed. I figured, Ryu said. He gives that speech to every new student, Ara continued, but he gave it to you in the middle of the main corridor, in front of everyone. She paused. He has never done that before. Ryu picked up his bag from where he had set it on the floor, and slung it back over his shoulder. Where? My room. Ara blinked her pale eyes. This way. She led him down the corridor, and he followed. Around them the Academy hummed and clicked and moved. Hundreds of students from dozens of worlds went about their day. None of them stopped staring for very long, but some of them kept watching longer than others, the ones with instincts older than their civilizations, the ones whose bodies understood something their minds hadn't caught up to yet. There was something about the human, something they couldn't name. It wasn't his size, he was small by any standard. It wasn't his build or his bearing or anything physical at all. It was something in the way he had stood in front of Dravok, who had made full-grown Vorath soldiers step back with a single look, and simply smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not the smile of someone trying to make a good impression. The smile of someone who had just been told the rules of a game, and was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Ara glanced at him from the side as they walked. He was looking straight ahead now, calm and quiet, hands back in his pockets. She made a private note to herself to pay very close attention to this human over the coming weeks. She had a feeling it would be worth it. The alien principal said no weapons allowed. The human grinned. The Academy had a rhythm to it. Classes in the morning, open study periods in the afternoon, meals in the large common hall, where tables were built at different heights for different species. Ryu learned the rhythm quickly. He was good at learning rhythms. It was one of those things that humans were quietly good at, reading the pattern of a place, understanding how it moved, knowing where the edges were. By the end of his first week, he had mapped the entire station in his head, not with paper or a device, just with his eyes and his memory and the habit of paying attention that had been trained into him since he was old enough to stand in a dojang and bow to his instructor. He found the 2 other humans on day 3. Dane was 20 years old, stationed at the Academy as a diplomatic liaison, technically not a student, but present in most of the same spaces. He was from Seoul, calm and precise in the way of someone who had spent years learning to be useful in rooms where he was the smallest person. He wore the standard gray liaison uniform, and always had a small notebook in his front pocket, though nobody had ever seen him write in it. Yul was 18 and studying xenobiology, the science of alien life forms. He was from Incheon, thin and slightly too tall for the Academy's human-sized furniture, which meant he spent most of his study time slightly hunched over tables built for species with 3-part spines. He complained about this often and cheerfully, which was one of his better qualities. The 3 of them found a corner table in the common hall on the 4th day, and sat together without making any formal arrangement to do so. It simply happened, the way it happens when people recognize something familiar in each other, without being able to explain exactly what it is. The Academy's kitchen systems were programmed for hundreds of species, and the human menu was a best-effort translation of nutritional requirements into available ingredients. It was never quite right. Ryu ate it without complaint. Dane added a small bottle of sauce from his jacket pocket to almost everything. Yule tried to identify each ingredient by taste and kept getting it wrong, which he also found cheerful. The aliens around them watched all of this with careful attention. Not hostile attention, not yet, but the kind of attention that a place gives to something new when it hasn't yet decided what category to put it in. The Vorath Collective had already decided. The Vorath were a student faction, the largest and most powerful in the academy. They came from a world where social order was built entirely on physical dominance, and they had carried that structure with them to Vora 9. Most Vorath students stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, with dense, layered musculature and skin that could stop a standard-grade shock baton without bruising. They moved through the corridors like the corridors belonged to them, because in every practical sense, they did. Their system was simple. Weaker students paid tribute: food, materials, study credits, access to equipment. In return, the Vorath left them alone. It was not officially permitted by the Academy. It was also not officially stopped. Dravok was many things, but he was practical above all else, and he understood that some social dynamics could not be removed by policy, only managed. They had approached nearly every student group in the station. Most paid. A few tried to resist and quickly reconsidered. The system had been running smoothly for 2 full academic cycles before the humans arrived. The Vorath leader was a student named Gore. He was 22, the largest of his cohort, with a flat, wide face and small, dark eyes that were very good at reading the weaknesses of other creatures. He had watched the 3 humans for a full week before he acted. Not because he was cautious by nature, but because something about them made his instincts run slightly slower than usual. He couldn't name what it was. He decided it didn't matter. He sent 2 of his group to approach Yule first, in the corridor outside the biology labs. They were big, and they stood close, and they made their request in the flat, simple language that the Vorath used for these conversations: resources, schedule, compliance. Yule looked up at them both. He was still carrying his biology notes. He thought for a moment. Then he said, very politely, that he didn't think he would be doing that. The 2 Vorath looked at each other. This was an unusual answer. They explained, in slightly clearer terms, what happened to students who gave unusual answers. Yule nodded and said he understood, and that he still didn't think he would be doing that. Then he apologized for the inconvenience and walked away. They watched him go. Neither of them moved to stop him, which surprised both of them afterward, and which neither of them mentioned to Gore in exactly those words. Dane received a similar visit 2 days later, in the common hall. The Vorath who approached him was larger than the 2 who had spoken to Yule. Dane listened to the full request with his hands flat on the table and his face completely still. When it was finished, he said nothing for a moment. Then he opened his notebook, the one nobody had ever seen him write in, and wrote something down. He closed it, put it back in his pocket, looked at the Vorath across from him, and said, "I've made a note of this conversation." He wasn't sure why. Gore came to Ryu himself. He found him alone in the east corridor, after the evening meal, walking back toward the residential block. Gore brought 4 others with him. He stopped Ryu in the middle of the corridor and made the offer directly. Goods, schedule, compliance, simple. Ryu stopped walking. He looked at Gore. He looked at the 4 behind him. He looked back at Gore. "No," he said. Gore tilted his head. His 4 companions shifted. The corridor was empty, except for them. "You don't understand what no means here," Gore said. "I think I do," Ryu said. "I've been watching your operation for a week. You've got 43 students paying you across 11 species. Your enforcement runs on fear and size and the general assumption that nobody will push back hard enough to make the trouble worth it." He paused. "That assumption doesn't apply to me." Gore stared at him. None of his four companions moved. The corridor was very quiet. I came here completely unarmed, Ryu said. The scanners confirmed it. Dravok confirmed it. Everybody on this station knows I have nothing on me. He let a beat of silence pass. You should think about what that means before you decide what to do next. He walked around Gore and continued down the corridor. Gore watched him go. His four companions watched him go. Nobody reached out to stop him. In the common hall the next morning, Aura sat down across from Ryu with her meal tray and studied him for a long moment. Gore approached you last night, she said. He did, Ryu said. What did you say to him? No, Ryu said. Aura was quiet for a moment. That's all? That's all. She looked at him carefully. Outside the wide viewport behind him, 2 stars burned quietly in the dark. The Academy moved around them. Hundreds of species going about their day, the whole system running on its usual rhythm. Ryu ate his breakfast. The sauce Dane had given him had improved it considerably. Aura kept watching him. She was becoming more certain by the day that she had made the right call, paying close attention to this human. She was also becoming more certain that something was coming. She just didn't know what shape it would take yet. The blackout drills happened twice a semester. They were standard protocol on Vora 9, a simulation of power failure conditions that required all students to move to their designated safe zones in the dark. The lights cut off station-wide. Emergency strips along the floor glowed a dim red. Visibility dropped to almost nothing in the lower corridors, which had no windows and no external light sources. Every student knew the drills happened. The dates were posted at the start of each semester. Gore had read the schedule carefully. The drill started at the 19th hour, when most of the station was in its evening cycle, and the corridors were quiet. The lights went out, all at once, not gradually, not with warning, just gone. And the red floor strips came on, and everything in the station went to that low, red-tinged dark that made every space feel smaller and every shadow feel deeper. Ryu and Yule were walking back from the biology lab together. Yule had stayed late to finish a cell sample analysis that had taken longer than expected, and Ryu had waited for him because the eastern residential corridor was on his way anyway, and he had nothing better to do. They were in the lower east passage, a long, narrow corridor that ran beneath the main floor of the academy and connected the lab wing to the residential block, when the lights went out. The red floor strips came on. Neither of them spoke. They kept walking. The first Vorath stepped out from the side alcove 20 meters ahead. Then another from behind. Then 2 more from the left maintenance passage. Then 2 from the right. 6 in total. All large. All Gores. Gore himself was the last to step out, from the alcove directly ahead, the one the first figure had moved away from to give him room. They carried shock batons, Academy-issued tools, technically, used by maintenance staff for electrical work, not officially weapons, not officially prohibited, technically available to any student who requested them from the equipment store, provided they gave a reason. The reason Gore had given was electrical lab project. Dravok's scanners didn't flag shock batons. They weren't on the weapons list. They were tools. Gore looked at the 2 humans standing in the middle of the corridor in the red dark. He felt better in the dark than in the light. Their eyes adjusted quickly and completely, and the dim red glow was more than enough for him to see everything he needed to see. Last time we spoke, Gore said, you told me my assumption didn't apply to you. He turned the baton slowly in one hand. I want to understand what you meant by that. Ryu looked at the 6 of them. He looked at the batons. He looked at the positions, 2 behind, 2 on the sides, 2 ahead, including Gore. He looked at the width of the corridor, the height of the ceiling, the distance between each of the 6 figures. He did all of this in the time it took to draw one breath. Yule took a small step to the right and slightly back, which put him against the wall and out of the central space. He had his datapad in his hand. He opened a new file. He began typing. "What is he doing?" one of the Vorath said. "Filing an incident report," Yule said, without looking up. "Timestamped. Auto-synced to the Academy server. Continue whenever you're ready." Gore looked at Yule for a moment. Then he looked back at Ryu. "No weapons on you," Gore said. "Scanned this morning. Clean, both of you." He held the baton out slightly. "We, however, are not unarmed." "I noticed," Ryu said. "So what was it you said? Your assumption doesn't apply to you?" Gore took one step forward. "I'm curious what a small, unarmed creature from a soft planet thinks makes it different from every other student who stood where you're standing." Ryu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know how old my species is?" Gore didn't answer. 200,000 years, Ryu said, give or take. For most of that time, we had no energy weapons, no plasma, no shock tech, no railguns, nothing you would recognize as a weapon at all, just our bodies, and we spent a very, very long time learning to use them. He paused. We built entire sciences around it, passed them down through generations, refined them, tested them against each other, constantly, for thousands of years. We turned it into art. The corridor was very quiet. "I've been training since I was 5 years old," Ryu said. 11 years, every day, and I'm not even close to the best my species has to offer. He looked at Gore steadily. "You have 6 people and 3 batons, and you're standing in the one formation that gives me the most options." Gore's jaw tightened. He raised the baton and moved forward. What happened next took 41 seconds. The first Vorath from behind came in fast, and Ryu wasn't there when he arrived. He had moved left and low, under the swing, one hand redirecting the baton arm as the other drove a short, precise strike to the joint of the creature's shoulder. The shoulder joint of a Vorath, Yule had noted in a previous biology class, was the species' single significant structural weakness, a point where 3 separate bone plates connected, and where direct impact produced complete temporary loss of function in the limb. Ryu had attended that class. He had asked 2 follow-up questions that Yule had found oddly specific at the time. The baton dropped. The next 2 came from the signs simultaneously. Ryu moved between them rather than away from them, inside their reach, where the batons were useless, where it was just bodies and balance, and the kind of close, efficient movement that doesn't look impressive and doesn't need to. One went down from a leg sweep and a controlled fall that the corridor floor helped with. The other took an elbow to the side of his neck that wasn't hard enough to cause serious damage, but was absolutely precise enough to cause the body to decide it was done standing for a few minutes. Ryu was already moving. One baton connected with his left forearm, and he let it, rolling with it rather than away from it, using the momentum to close distance faster than the Vorath expected. And then, the Vorath was on the ground and looking at the ceiling, and wasn't completely sure how it had happened. The last one, not Gore, hesitated. 1 second, the pause of a creature whose body had just updated its threat assessment without consulting its intentions. Ryu looked at him. The Vorath took a step back. That left Gore. Gore was still standing in the same spot. His baton was raised. He was staring at the 5 members of his group on the floor of the corridor. All of them conscious, none of them seriously hurt. All of them very still. And then he was staring at the human who was standing in the middle of all of them, breathing evenly, hands relaxed at his sides. The red floor strips hummed their quiet, dim hum. "I came here completely unarmed," Ryu said. "I told you to think about what that meant." He turned and looked at Yule. Yule looked up from his datapad. "I've got all of it," he said. "Time, location, 6 names, 1 attempted assault, 1 hesitation, 0 injuries on our side. Do you want me to add anything?" "Just send it," Ryu said. The lights came back on. The blackout drill was over. Ryu and Yule walked the rest of the way to the residential block. Behind them, 6 Vorath students sat or lay on the floor of the lower east corridor, surrounded by dropped shock batons and the very specific silence of creatures who have just learned something they cannot unlearn. Gore stayed where he was for a long time after the others had gotten up and left. He was thinking about what Ryu had said. 200,000 years. He was still thinking about it when he finally stood up and walked away. The alien principal said, "No weapons allowed." The human grinned. The summons arrived the next morning. 3 small notification chimes, one for each human, delivered to their translation devices at the 6th hour, just as the station's lights were cycling up to their daytime setting. Short message. No details. Just a time, a location, and the name Dravok printed beneath it in every language the Academy's system supported, which was a very long list. Ryu read his and went back to sleep for another 40 minutes. Dane read his, made a note in his notebook, and laid out his liaison uniform carefully on the chair beside his bed. Yule read his and spent 20 minutes organizing his incident report into a clean, properly formatted document with a table of contents. They arrived at Dravok's office at exactly the correct time. The office was at the top of the Academy's central tower, a wide, high-ceilinged room with a long window that looked out onto open space. 2 stars were visible through the glass. The room smelled like something old and dry, the way rooms smell when the same large creature has occupied them for a very long time. Dravok was seated behind his desk, which was not really a desk in the human sense, but a wide, low platform covered in data surfaces that responded to his lower limbs the way a screen responds to a hand. He was already looking at them when they came in. His 8 eyes tracked all 3 at once without effort. 3 chairs had been placed in front of the desk, human scale. Someone had brought them up from the student common area. They sat down. Dravok said nothing for a moment. On the data surfaces in front of him, information was visible. Scanner logs, hallway footage, medical reports from the Academy's health station, and Yule's incident report, which was open at the first page. "I have reviewed everything," Dravok said. None of the 3 humans responded to this. They sat quietly and waited. Dravok's upper limbs moved slowly across his chest plate and settled. The scanner records confirmed that neither of you carried any weapon of any classification into the lower east corridor last night or at any point during the preceding week. Your personal quarters have been scanned 4 times since your arrival. Nothing prohibited has ever been found. He paused. "This is accurate." "Yes," Ryu said. Dravok looked at the footage playing on one of his data surfaces. The angle was from a maintenance camera high on the corridor wall. Not the best quality, but clear enough. 41 seconds. One human who was never in the same place twice, and always exactly where he needed to be. He watched it again. Then he looked at Ryu. "You carried no weapons," he said, slowly, as though testing the sentence for structural problems. "Correct," Ryu said. Dravok was quiet for a long moment. The stars moved imperceptibly outside the window. In the distance, a small transport vessel crossed the glass and was gone. "What are you people?" Dravok said. The question came out differently than his usual speech. Flatter, more direct, stripped of the formal register he used in corridors and classrooms. It was the question of a creature who had spent decades believing it had a complete model of the galaxy's inhabitants, and had just discovered a gap in it. Dane unfolded his hands from his lap and placed them on the edge of the desk platform. He had been in rooms like this before. Not on space stations, but in government buildings on Earth, in embassies and briefing rooms, and offices where the furniture was large and the conversations were important. He knew how to sit in them. "We're the species," Dane said, "that put no weapons allowed signs on our own school doors long before we ever left our planet. We painted them on walls, and printed them on cards, and announced them at the start of every assembly. He let that sit for a second. And then we spent thousands of years figuring out how to not need them. Dravok stared at him. The rule makes sense, Dane continued. We understand why it exists. We agree with it. Nobody in this room is arguing against it. He paused. But the rule was written with a specific assumption built into it, that removing weapons removes the capacity for harm. That assumption works perfectly well for most species. It has a gap. Dravok's jaw plate moved slightly. It was the closest thing his species had to a frown. We come from a world that spent the better part of its history at war with itself, Dane said. Not just with tools and machines, with bodies. We built complete systems of combat that use nothing but the human body as the instrument. We named them, studied them, taught them to children as young as 4 and 5 years old. We held international competitions. We put them in schools as part of physical education. He looked at Dravok evenly. We didn't stop doing this when we invented better weapons. We kept doing it because we valued it, because it taught discipline and control and the precise, careful use of force. Ryu has been training for 11 years, Yule added, without looking up from his report. I have 8. Dane has 14. Dravok's eyes moved across all 3 of them. 6 Vorath students, he said, with shock batons. And your only response was your own bodies. 6 Vorath students who initiated a premeditated assault during a scheduled blackout drill, using equipment obtained under a false pretense, Yule said, and turned his datapad around on his knee so that Dravok could see the formatted incident report. I've documented everything. Table of contents on the first page. The section on baton acquisition is on page 3. Dravok looked at the datapad. He looked at Yule. He looked at the datapad again. Something shifted in his posture. Not a physical lean, but a change in the overall quality of his stillness. The way the air changes in a room when someone has just updated a fundamental assumption. He had governed this academy for 31 years. He had seen students from 63 species. He had managed conflicts, mediated disputes, enforced rules, and maintained order across a student body that included creatures who could level walls with their bare hands. He thought he understood the full range of what living things could be. In 31 years, he said, slowly, no student has ever arrived in my office following an altercation with a full incident report, a table of contents, and time-stamped server synchronization. It was auto-synced, Yule said helpfully. The Academy's own system. Everything I recorded is already on the server. It went up while the incident was still happening. Dravok looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Ryu, who had been quiet since he answered the first question. Ryu was sitting in his chair with his jacket on and his hands on his knees, looking at Dravok with the same calm, direct look he had worn in the corridor on his first day. The same look he had worn when Dravok gave him the weapon speech in front of the whole school. The same look he had worn when the 6 Vorath stepped out of the dark. You knew they would come. It was not a question this time either. Yes, Ryu said. And you went to the lab anyway. Yule needed to finish his analysis. Dravok stared at him. You walked into an ambush you knew was coming because your colleague had lab work to complete. Ryu thought about this for a moment. I also wanted to see if Gore would actually do it, he said, and I wanted it on record when he did. The room was quiet. Outside the window, one of the 2 visible stars pulsed faintly. Some distant, slow process in its outer layers that had nothing to do with anything happening in this room, but which reminded everyone present, briefly, of the scale of the universe surrounding them. Dravok looked down at his data surfaces for a moment. Then he looked back up. The Vorath students involved will be dealt with through the Academy's formal process, he said. Gore will face a conduct review. As for the 3 of you, He paused again, longer. I have no category for what you did last night. My conduct framework does not cover it. You broke no rule. You followed every instruction. You responded to assault with force proportional to the threat, and did not exceed it. Another pause. You also filed a better incident report than my own security staff. Thank you, Yule said sincerely. Dravok's jawplate moved again, something that, after 31 years of dealing with students, might possibly have been the very beginning of something that was not quite a smile, but was in the same general direction. You are dismissed, he said. They stood. They left. Dravok remained at his desk after the door closed. He looked at the footage again. 41 seconds. He looked at Yule's report. He looked at the scanner logs, confirming nothing on either human from the moment they arrived. He sat with all of this for a long time. Then he opened a new document and began, very carefully, to write. The alien principal said, "No weapons allowed." The human grinned. The Vorath collective did not dissolve all at once. It didn't collapse in a single dramatic moment. It came apart the way most things come apart, when the thing holding them together stops working. Quietly, gradually, and then all at once at the end, with no ceremony and no announcement. Gore's conduct review took 9 days. During those 9 days, he was removed from his normal schedule and confined to formal proceedings. Without him present in the corridors, the Vorath group moved differently, looser, less coordinated. The other members were individually capable, but the system they had built depended on a center, and the center was gone. Students who had been paying tribute quietly stopped paying. One by one, and then in small groups, they simply didn't show up to the exchange points. The Vorath members who came to collect found empty corridors. They reported this to the acting second-in-command, who reported it to the third, who reported it to nobody, because there was no structure left to report to. 2 weeks after the incident in the Lower East Corridor, the Vorath Collective had stopped functioning. Its members still existed, still shared a table in the common hall, still spoke the same language and came from the same world. But the system was gone. The territories were gone. The tribute was gone. The fear that had kept 43 students quiet and compliant for 2 academic cycles had evaporated so completely that it was difficult afterward to say exactly when it had left. Ara watched all of this from her usual vantage points around the academy, and kept her own careful record of it. She had not told Ryu she was doing this. She hadn't told anyone. It was simply something she found herself doing, the same way she had found herself paying attention to him from that first day in the main corridor. Not because she was asked to, but because her instincts had identified something worth tracking, and she was the kind of person who listened to her instincts. She brought her notes to him 3 weeks after the blackout incident, on a quiet afternoon in the study hall. She sat down across from him, put a single folded piece of printed film on the table between them, and waited. He picked it up, read it, set it down. "You've been watching the whole thing," he said. "Yes," she said. "Good observations," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I want to understand something," she said. "The Vorath didn't just lose one fight. They lost everything. Their entire structure fell apart. 6 students in a corridor shouldn't have been able to do that." "It wasn't the fight," Ryu said. "The fight was just the visible part." He leaned back in his chair. "They were running on the assumption that nobody would push back. That assumption was the whole foundation. Once it broke, everything built on it broke with it." He paused. "It was always one push away from falling. It just needed something to push it." Ara considered this. "And you knew that?" "I suspected it," he said. "I wasn't certain until I watched how they ran their operation for a week." Ara looked at him for a long time. "You are a very strange kind of creature," she said, and did not mean it unkindly. Ryu smiled, the same smile from that first corridor. Easy and unhurried, and belonging entirely to itself. "Thank you," he said. Dravok's new document was finished at the end of the month. It was added to the Academy's official handbook as an amendment. A single clause, simple and direct, sitting at the end of the section on student classifications and threat assessments. It read, "Students of human origin are exempt from standard threat classification protocols." No further explanation was given. The clause simply existed, in the handbook, alongside everything else. New students who arrived and read the handbook came to it and paused for a moment and then moved on, filing it away as one of those institutional oddities that all old schools accumulate over time. A Korvathi student from Dravok's homeworld, new to the academy 2 semesters after Ryu's arrival, read the clause and asked her orientation partner what it meant. Her partner, a second-year student who had been present in the corridor near the science labs on the morning after the blackout incident, and had watched 6 large Vorat students walk back to their quarters in a very specific kind of silence, simply said, "It means what it says," and moved on to the next section of the handbook. The Korvathi student noted it and kept going. On a Tuesday afternoon, several weeks after the handbook amendment was published, Ara found Ryu in the East Observation Room, a small, circular space on the outer ring of the station with a full-length curved window that looked out onto open space. She came in and sat beside him without saying anything. They sat together for a while in the way that people sit together when they have passed through enough shared experience to be comfortable with quiet. Outside the window, the stars were very bright and very still. "Can I ask you something?" Ara said eventually. "Yes." "That first day," she said, "when Dravok gave you the weapons speech in the main corridor, in front of everyone." She paused. "You smiled." "I did," he said. "Why?" He thought about this for a moment. Not because the answer was complicated, but because he was deciding how to say it simply. "Because he sent no weapons," Ryu said, "and I thought, good." He looked out at the stars. "My whole life, the places that said no weapons were the places that were trying to be fair, trying to put everyone on the same level, trying to make it about something other than who came in with the most firepower." He paused. "When Dravok said it, I thought, this place is trying to be something. It has a standard it cares about." He let a beat of silence pass, and I thought, I can work with that. Fair fight. Clean rules. Let's see what everyone actually is without the hardware. Ara was quiet for a while. "And the smile?" she said. "Because I also knew," he said, "that a fair fight isn't the same as an equal fight. It just means everyone starts with the same rules." He glanced at her. "And I've been playing by these particular rules since I was 5 years old." Ara processed this slowly, with the thoroughness that she applied to everything. She turned it over, looked at it from several angles, sat with the full weight of it. "Your species invented war," she said, "then invented the rules of war. Then invented a way to win without technically violating the rules." "That's one way to say it," Ryu said. "Is there another way?" He thought about it. "We really, really like a fair fight," he said. "And we're very, very good at them." Outside, the stars continued to do what stars do. Burn quietly and without opinion at the center of everything. Indifferent to the small, warm creatures circling them in their small metal stations, trying to figure out how to live together without tearing each other apart. Inside the observation room, a human and a Korvathi sat in the window light and watched the dark. Somewhere in the academy below them, Dane was writing in his notebook. Yule was in the biology lab, slightly too tall for his chair, cheerfully misidentifying ingredients in the academy's evening meal samples. 43 students who had spent 2 semesters paying tribute were going about their evenings without paying tribute to anyone. And in the academy handbook, on a page near the back, a single small clause sat in the text and waited for the next student to reach it, and pause, and wonder what exactly it meant to be exempt from standard threat classification protocols. What it meant was simple. It just took a while to understand. It meant that some creatures are most dangerous precisely when they are most unarmed. That the absence of weapons is not the same thing as the absence of capability. That 200,000 years leaves marks that no scanner can detect and no rule can neutralize. Because the marks are in the muscle and the bone, and the long, patient memory of a species that has been learning, generation by generation, what it means to be human. It meant they came in smiling. And that was enough.